Oh, Jesus Christ. This intro's got to go because this intro is the one thing that freezes my computer up. So I believe, and I've watched the last couple of podcasts.
It's a lot.
I've watched the last couple of podcasts. I think I'm probably sitting there looking like an absolute numpty for the first 5 seconds of every podcast because my computer is still showing a picture of me riding on a dolphin. So
but I mean,
anyway,
if you've ridden on a dolphin, why wouldn't you want that picture on the screen? You know,
I mean that and dick pics and that's pretty much my entire portfolio. Elliot, thank you for joining us. That's the royal us today. Elliot, by the way, is apparently available with 45 seconds notice for any issue whatsoever that you might have. So I certainly don't mean to commit you to that for other people's podcasts, but
with varying levels of competence, but yes.
Exactly. So truly appreciate you being available because you're a guy who certainly understands business, understands finance, understands Arsenal, and when you put them all together, no one knows what's coming next. And in fact, you and I have actually had very polite sparring matches on Twitter in the past about finance and player trading related things. So it's nice to have somebody on and who I can communicate on a level with, and it's not just an echo chamber. So,
I like to think of myself as someone who is willing to be strongly opinionated about the things I know the least about. I think that's of a piece with where we are as a society. So, I'm trying to be topical. There you go.
That is actually the definition in the Webster's dictionary of podcaster is someone who's willing to have the strongest possible opinion about the least awareness type of thing. So here's how today's going to go. And first of all, I just want to comment that we've been doing a lot of different content this week. March is Gooners Pod Month. And I know that you've been celebrating Gooners Pod Month on your podcast, but
always,
yes, of course. But some very on-brand shows this week, like the FA Cup of Football Phrases that we did on Wednesday. That was a hell of a lot of fun. Tune in to see who was the most bell-worthy phrase of them all. And then some very off-brand shows this week, including a serious interview on Tuesday with a certain member of our fan base by the name of Lee Gunner, who I don't get along with at all. I didn't bring him on the podcast to promote the podcast. In fact, I tried to anti-promote it, but I think you'll find it interesting. If you listen to 80 minutes of him contradicting himself, trying to act super hard, act like he doesn't care about negative things, and then talk about how much he cares about negative things, I think you'll kind of learn a lot about the psyche of one of the most notorious fans in the Arsenal fan base. So have a watch on that. It might not be what you expect. And then
that is crazy.
Very
I can't believe that happened. Yeah.
And it only happened. He blocked me for 2 years because we had a personal falling out. I mean, we knew each other well before that. We had a personal falling out. He blocked me, and we were doing a similarly themed podcast the night before, and he basically chose that opportunity to come into the chat, spam it with a bunch of negative Arteta, negative toxic positivity type of stuff. And I basically said, look, if you're going to come in our chat and do that, fine. But, why don't you unblock me and let's hash this out. So not a pod that I planned on doing, but, someone's going to call you out. You call that out.
Fair enough. I don't engage in beef. I just want now let me.
That's the right way to go through life, man.
I engage in consuming beef.
I was about to say I engage in beef in all ways, including
steaks, carpaccio, prime rib, steak sandwiches. So I engage in the consumption of beef, but I do not engage in the interpersonal beef. If that makes any sense.
Elliot is, as Abraham Maslow would have said in his prime, the self-actualized version of Mike Feinberg.
I'll take it, man. I'll take it. Yeah, why not?
I mean, any version of me that's better than me is worth having, I think. So anyway, off-brand for me, again, a kind of a goofy, fat, balding yank is a financial pod. But believe it or not, I actually have some history in finance, in business, and I've invited a guy on the podcast in Elliot that he's turned down the Minister of Finance job for 69 developing companies and countries.
I am the CEO of Black River Conglomerate Industries, which is obviously, as everybody knows, an industry leader in decentralized global conglomeration. So to the extent that I am qualified for this podcast, I would argue I'm not sure anybody is more qualified to discuss what is another global conglomerate, which is KSE, which is Stan's Sporting Empire. So there you go.
And in knowing you as well as I do, which is not greatly well, but better than not.
I would say that's
somehow I fell for
fair
that.
characterization.
Somehow I fell for that and massively congratulated you on your new opportunity.
WhatsApp me a congratulations on my fake position. So thank you for that.
I did. I was very excited for I take great interest in your professional career. All right, so let's get to it. What I've done basically is the financial reports for Arsenal have come out. Financial statements can be dry, they can be very complicated, they can be confusing, or you can read from them what you want. So this is not a podcast meant to kind of toe the line and try to make a point. It's really just to kind of break things down. And so some people might actually find this rather boring. If you do, I'm not making you watch this. Just in case you were wondering whether I was
making you watch this. There you go.
Yes, I told you. I said, make all of your fans and your followers, make them watch this, please.
Side note, all of my fans and followers are actually only fans and followers of mine to find out what's up with Clive and when Clive will next be on content. So that's
amazing. Yeah, you've positioned yourself as the conduit to Clive, and who wouldn't want to be the conduit to Clive?
Yeah.
By the way, I'm counting on you to get him to stop going on all those other podcasts he's been doing, even though they're friends of ours, and come on ours, exclusively ours, not even yours anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I would.
Is that
say
a deal I can count on you for?
I would say that if there's one thing I am known for, it is telling Clive what to do and having him do precisely that. I can't even get him to answer the questions I ask. So, Clive's going to Clive, and that's why we love Clive, because he's going to Clive.
So we've got phone alarms going off because I'm uber professional. We've got about 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes to go through this. So firstly, the report that came out today, the football is a funny thing and finance is a funny thing in that the financial reports that are coming out on 5th of March, 2021 are for a year that ended about 9 months ago. And, it's not that I don't know if it's that it takes 9 months for all of the abacuses to line up and the numbers to come together, but, it's for a year that ends the same year that the football season normally ends in a traditional fiscal year. So this being no traditional fiscal year, it's an interesting report because it ends 31 May 2020. Take yourself back to 31 May 2020. Champions League final normally just played, FA Cup final normally just played, end of the season normally a week or two in the rearview mirror. Not this year. There's a significant portion of the season that was played after May 31st, including in Europe, although not by us. But finances are a little bit wonky in this year because it doesn't include any of that. So keep that in mind as we go along, and the true impact of that is going to be felt in the 2021 report, where we're pretty much going to have almost a season and a third wrapped up into one financial report, for better or for worse. Impact of COVID-19 on these financial statements is there. It's nowhere near what it will be for the year going forward, because of the likelihood that the entire season or most of it will be impacted by that. So keep in mind that the COVID losses on this year's financial statement are really only for 3 months, from March 7th, which I think was the last game played in the football league. Maybe it was a few days later, to May 2020. So pre-tax losses of $35 million attributable to just the $14 million lost from game day revenues, deferral pushing of $34 million from last year into this year, and then the cost savings of $19 million, which include the wage reduction scheme agreed by most of, this says by the men's first team squad. I think we know that it should be most of the men's first team squad. There were a few that
I am contractually prohibited from naming the person who may not have been in favor of that for fear of my mentions. Okay,
perfect. Then let's not let's just talk turkey then. Okay. Since I've highlighted the areas that kind of are important to this, and since the year end, the group has refinanced its stadium finance bonds. We know that the money is still owed on the stadium. The stadium's not truly paid off, as a lot of people think it has been, but the group did refinance those bonds, taking a range of cost-cutting measures since year end. So this is just a forward-looking statement, as we call that in the biz, to say that next year is going to be worse. The financial challenge is significant, but that they have done some things to try to mitigate the risk on that. The loss for the year after taxes. And taxes are pretty insignificant because taxes actually gave them back money this last year rather than took them from them.
Must be nice.
Well, must be nice. I'm a big fan of Hamilton, so you can't say it must be nice without me losing my train of thought and thinking
Fair.
of having
apologies,
having Washington on my side. But in any case, the loss for the year was about 48 million quid versus the previous year of about 27 million. And this is kind of a breakdown here of how that went. The profits before player trading, which is the buying and selling of players, was down sharply, about 36 million from the year before to this year. That probably shouldn't be surprising considering that we lost some game day revenue and lost some, our continuing decline even in the Europa League and in the league position has resulted in lower TV revenue. Player registrations, we'll get to that in a little bit. 24 million more spent on that than in the year before on buying players. But the sale of player registrations, this is going to be a big topic later. 47 million additional profit from the year before. 2 words: Alex Iwobi. That pretty much makes up most of that. But we'll dive into this a little bit more. But the loss before taxes, 2019 was 32 million. This year, 54 million, and that just gives you an idea of kind of where the trend is going on things, and that includes player trading. I'll go kind of I'll scan through this a little bit. I don't want this to end up being too dry, but wage costs are something that I'm always fascinated by because there's just this common misconception that wage costs are solely the wage packets. So the $350 a week that Mesut Ozil made plus the $200,000 that Aubameyang was making, and so on and so forth. But the wage bill is a combination of those outlays for players, staff, coaches, agents, and proportional amortization of transfer fees. And so one of my biggest pet peeves, Elliot, is when people talk about a transfer kitty as though there's like this bank of 40 million pounds that the coach is being given to buy players with, because that just ignores the fact that contracts are spread over a number of years, that sales are booked in the year they're received. So when you sell Iwobi for 40 million pounds, they account for that as being received all at once. But when you buy Pepe for 72 million pounds, whether you pay up front or whether you pay in installments, as we know we did, that gets spread over the length of the contract. So if we have a 5-year contract with Pepe and spent 72 million on him, we're only booking 14.4 million pounds of that every year for 5 years on our balance sheet.
Can I ask you a question about that though? So because there's a part of that there are 2 ways to look at the reality of a company, right? You can look at the reality of a company in terms of their books, what their books say. You can look at the reality of a company in terms of what their bank account says. And
cash
when it's a
versus
public,
accrual.
Yeah, but what I mean is that, like, when you have a public company, what the books say matters because it affects share price, and accounting tricks can actually be a benefit to a public company because it can help keep the share price high or make it look like you beat earnings or things like that. This is not a public company. So let's say we were able to amortize the purchase of Pepe over 400 years. Okay? Great. If we pay the 72 million pounds in one summer, it's 72 million pounds that isn't in the bank to go buy other players. So I guess what I'm asking you is, what difference does it make how they account for it on the books when what really matters is what's sitting in the bank? That's the part I don't get.
Well, what does matter is what's sitting in the bank, but there's as you said, there's future debt obligations that force us. I mean, we have, as you'll find out later, we have 110 million pounds in the bank. That doesn't mean it's all spendable because we have obligations in the future that are set against that. But first of all, the club doesn't have the ability, and I may circle around to the answer. I just want to put out a couple points. They don't have the ability to dictate how they amortize players on the books. That's set by the Premier League or possibly by UEFA. It has to do with financial fair play. I mean, every club doesn't just get to decide that we're going to amortize Pepe's contract over 10 years rather than the length of the contract, because those are the rules that it has to be done over the length of the contract. But you know, it matters how much. What was the question? No, it matters.
Because when you say, all right, we have this much to spend or that much to spend, you don't go to the bank and say like, hey, I know it only shows that we've got 50 million pounds in the bank, but we actually amortized the cost last summer. So can you give us some of it back? Like if we give Lille 72 million pounds, we gave Lille 72 million pounds. It doesn't matter what we do on our books. You know what I mean? Or am I wrong about that?
Well, no. I mean, there's a nuance to it. You're right, and you're wrong. I mean, if we don't have the money to physically pay Pepe without having to borrow to raise those funds, then yes, it matters. But from a profitability standpoint, and determining whether we're running a self-sustaining model or are obligating ourselves to things we're not going to be able to cover with future expenses, that's where it matters. And frankly, if you negotiate a purchase price of 72 million pounds for Pepe, and you decide to pay them over 4 years, which is what was widely established to be the case, you're likely paying more than you would have if you had just paid them up front. I mean, I would say there was probably an offer to buy Pepe for 63 million in cash or 72 million over 4 years. It wasn't just 72 million now or 72 million over 4 years. It's simple discounting for time value of money. So the way they actually structured the purchase was based on cash on hand. The way they're accounting for the purchase, which deals with profitability, it deals with what you can do in the future with raising funds, with trying to balance that against future television revenues, all of which are based on things you can't necessarily predict because they involve league position, finishing and a player blowing up, and are you going to sell Saka for 150 million or are you going to keep him? Those sort of things are kind of hard to predict years in advance, but.
Because I guess all I'm saying, right,
some people are going to compare. Some people are going to care more about the actual money that's on hand than the accounting, and I get that.
Well, I would think Stan would, right? Because again, ultimately, like I've always thought that tricks of accounting and amortization, things like that, are ways to represent your profitability to an audience. But when a company is privately held, the audience doesn't really matter, right? Stan knows what cash has gone out, and he knows what cash has come in, and those accounts speak for themselves. And I would think that and again, if we pay for Pepe over 3 years, let's say it was a 60 million purchase, we pay 20 million each summer. However we account for it, the money that's in the bank is the money that's in the bank. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't change the economic reality.
There is a balance sheet that is an addition. I mean, the income statement is not the only part of the financial report. There is a balance sheet as well.
Yes.
Which, and the two things interrelate in that sense, because the balance sheet shows legitimately what is on hand and shows the true financial reality of the club.
That makes sense.
But the reason I point out and it is kind of an accounting trick, but it's one that's at least consistently applied across all Premier League teams.
Yeah.
And in the sense that you bank the registration of a sale right away, and the purchases are amortized over the length of the contract. A 1-year contract, like or two, like with David Luiz, is going to be amortized all at once. Whereas, you offer a 6-year contract to a guy like Gabriel, or a 5-year contract, whether you're paying the 25, 26 we paid to Lille for that one, that purchase cost us so little because his wages are small, and you're taking 20 something million and dividing it over 5 years.
Right.
That was a no-brainer. It was a brilliant piece of business.
So, can I ask you a question? Like, just to reduce this to an absurd example.
I brought you on the pod so that you would.
Well, I knew there was a reason.
So
let's say we signed 5 50 million pound players in one summer, and they were all on 10-year contracts. And so,
which is rare, but hypothetically,
right? Just hypothetically. Except we paid for all of it that summer, so we spent 250 million in cash. But on the income statement, because it's amortized over the 10 years, we're only booking $5 million in that calendar year, in that fiscal year, for each transaction. So it looks like
25 million.
We spent 25 million. And then the income statement comes out and say, we only spent 25 million. Why didn't we buy more players? Well, we put out 250 million pounds in cash. So which is the number that matters? You know what I'm saying? That's why I don't...
And this was a debate that I had 2 summers ago, the summer of 2019. because and we're going to end up using the entire. I mean, this is a 20-page. I've boiled 42 pages down to 20. We're going to end up going to our 45 minutes of this, and I know you've got to run. I will probably stay on. But
no, that's okay.
Unfortunately, that's okay. We knew the deal. The difference is, this was a huge argument because in 2019 we bought Pepe, we bought Saliba. We bought Luiz, we bought Martinelli, we bought Kieran Tierney, and we sold Iwobi and Bielik. Really, was pretty much the only ones that we sold for any significant money, unless I'm overlooking somebody. There were people out there that tried to say, "Well, we spent 18 million on Pepe this year. We got 40 million for Iwobi this year. We were paying 8 million a year for 3 years for Tierney," and try to act as though we actually made a profit on that summer. Okay, and the reality is there wasn't a profit made, period, because if you use cash accounting, what do we commit to versus what do we sell? We know that we had a huge net spend that summer. If we use the money we received, because I'll tell you, we didn't sell Iwobi for cash. We sold him on installments. It's just that we book all the cash right away.
Yep.
So from an accounting standpoint, yeah, we spent from an accounting standpoint, because of the rules being the way they are, we got a lot of money booked in 2019 summer and did not spend a tremendous amount of money considering how many players we purchased and how much net spend we had. And that's how they kept the books balanced for 2019. Now that comes home to roost in the future, just the same as the fact that when people were claiming we only spent 18 million pounds in 2019 on Pepe, they were conveniently forgetting the fact that we also spent 10 million pounds on Granit Xhaka in 2019.
I see.
We spent, I mean, this might piss people off, but we're going to spend 7 million pounds on Mustafi in 2019.
Yeah.
The fifth year of installments from players we bought in 2016 and 17 are still being paid. But when you want to make a narrative point about the fact that we aren't spending money, it's easy to conveniently forget those things.
I guess the argument is you can reference the portion of the transfer fee we spent in that summer and say that's all we spent, but that only makes sense if you're then going to reference the portions of prior transfer fees that fell into that summer. So in my dumb 5 players for 50 million example, amortized over 10 years, you could say we only spent 25 million that summer, but for the next 9 subsequent summers, you're still going to have to be counting the 25 million in spending.
Yeah, we paid 18 million for Pepe this year. We'll pay 18 million for Pepe next year. But if you want to look at our net spend and not you, but I'm saying if one wants to have a narrative about our net spend, it's conveniently easy to forget about those things. And for someone who unlike you gets involved in beefs, beyond just consuming and eating them.
I'm an internet vegan. I eat a lot of beef, but I'm internet. Vegan. I'm vegan.
Yeah, I'm a beefcatarian or whatever they're called.
Whatever that.
Carnivore. Yeah, I'm a carnivore in every phase of my life, I suppose. So, I used to have 3 kids, and now I only have 2. So,
that's terrifying. The praying mantis of the Arsenal world. There you go.
I eat everything in sight, but I got in a lot of arguments that summer on Twitter, basically saying, so you just want to have it both ways. You want to act, like we're not spending money this summer and then forgetting about the money that we still have for previous summer. So I think we've kind of beat that into the ground. But yeah, it's an ongoing, continual thing. And they even reference that in the financial statement. So yeah, it does come home to roost later, because whether we, and even if we sell these players that we're still, you're 25 million a year for 250 million of players, even if we sell those players, we're still paying, we still have to balance the profit off of the money we still owed. So I think we could put a bow on that. But on the balance sheet, we have 110 million pounds of cash on hand compared to last year where we had 167 million of cash on hand. That is alarming. And the 110 million of cash on hand is vital to pay for upcoming obligations like our future installments on Pepe and debt and that sort of thing. So, and it says the levels of debtors and creditors were influenced by pandemic related factors and by the club transfer activity, both inbound and outbound, with installments of the transfer fees being payable and receivable over time, mostly over the next 2 years. Interesting little point here. In key performance indicators, ticket sales in 2000 and average ticket sales over 21 home games, ending with the West Ham game in March, about almost exactly a year ago, 59,254 versus 58,943. So what they're saying is last year's ticket sales were higher than the year before. Now, ticket sales do not equal attendance, as we know, but interesting ticket sales actually went up from the year before. This will be very interesting to see next year because of the whole ticket renewal in the midst of a pandemic dynamic, which is not going to be pleasant for anybody involved. The strategic report indicates in very clear terms they understand that COVID is going to be a big risk going forward. The performance and popularity of the first team is important. At least the club recognizes that in writing, maybe not in action. But the negotiation and pricing of broadcasting contracts. Now, the current contract, I believe, goes through the end of next season. It's this season, it's next season, and then a new broadcasting contract. I've been following the relationship between transfer fees and wages and the broadcasting contract increases over the past 14 years, pretty much since Manchester City became, Galactico spenders. And they're almost in lockstep. Like when you look at the average transfer fees and the average largest transfer fees in 2006 and compare them to 2020, the dynamic between that and the money that the Premier League was getting for broadcasting is almost the same. So one of these days, and it could be the next time, 2022, when that contract gets revisited, do you think, Elliot, there's any possibility that the Premier League ends up not having to pay, or I'm sorry, the other way around, that Sky and BT and BN Sport and NBC Sports and ESPN and everyone around the world ends up like getting away with paying less for the goods that are being put out because of market supply and demand? Because if they do, it should be very interesting to see what happens to some of these clubs, some of these transfer fees and wages that people are on.
Let me ask you, how do you think it could be impacted by the broadcasting of more games and more games being available for TV? Do you think that could offset, those changes? Because I do wonder if more games is the way that the league negotiates with the broadcasters to keep the revenues up, keep the payments up, and maybe even enlarge the payments. There's obviously the question of what happens with streaming, but I think we've seen there's an expression, like exchanging analog dollars for digital pennies or whatever they call it, digital dimes. Right, yeah. I don't know.
Digital tuppence.
Yeah. And to be fair, with the price of digital tokens these days, you may want digital tokens, given that Bitcoin is to the moon. But I don't know. I wonder, a lot of people point to streaming. There's no evidence yet that streaming can be as is willing to pay or can pay as much for the league or wants to pay as much for broadcast rights that the analog companies do. I don't know. This is all speculation at this point, because someone could come in, a streaming company could come in and just feel that content that is live content that people will pay pretty much any amount of money to have access to is worth its weight in gold and offer double the amount that the cable companies are willing to offer, or streaming may not be willing to come up with the same amount of money and the contracts may go down, or they may just decide to broadcast more games. Mike, the thing for me is I don't know that anybody really knows where broadcast revenues are going to go, but I don't think the league popularity is shrinking. So the league is going to have to find a way to distribute the game to broadcasters in a way that maintains their revenue.
Right.
And no, I don't think it's selling directly to end users. That's for sure.
Yeah. I would agree with you that the league's popularity is higher than ever, but there is a point at which supply and demand starts to rule itself. And guns are butter, as I learned in economics class. We having just been through a pandemic where people's priorities have somewhat changed, and being at home, you watch more sports. I'm not saying that it's made sport less interesting, but being in a pandemic, potential, global financial meltdowns, oversaturation, all those things could lead to the point where they're like, there's just nothing that sets in stone that broadcasters have to keep increasing by 30% every time a new contract comes up, the amount of money that they're paying. Ultimately, they're getting that money because people are dying to broadcast the Premier League. At some point, people will look at the losses and say, we don't want this to be a loss leader anymore. I don't think anybody that's broadcasting the Premier League is making money off of it. I don't think NBC Sports is here in the U.S.
Here's the thing, right?
I'd love to look at their financial statement.
I agree. Well, here's why streaming is interesting, right? Because I don't think from an ad sales standpoint, the companies that are paying for the Premier League are making their money back on ad sales. I do think there's a question of how many people stay subscribed to their providers.
It's that indirect income.
Because remember also, and the model's different. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole here, but like cable companies pay to have ESPN in their package in the United States, right? In the UK, users pay to have Sky Sports. It's more of a model that's similar to like a Netflix or something, right? You're paying for that service specifically. Whereas here, if I want to have DirecTV or Comcast Cable or whatever it is, I pay them the fee. And then they pay all the stations to have them in their package. So it is a little convoluted in terms of determining whether they make their money on it, because they may not make it in ad sales, but they may make it in terms of making their service appealing enough that the carrier wants to pay them. Like, I mean, this is the issue. For example, I bet everybody watching this stream who's US-based is a Peacock subscriber. At one point or another was an NBC Gold subscriber. At one point or another is a CBS All Access or Paramount Plus subscriber.
I've got that. I got ESPN Plus for the FA Cup.
At one point in time was a BR Live subscriber. And you say, why do you have all these crappy streaming services?
Disney
Some are great.
Plus so I can watch Hamilton 8 times a day?
The reason we have it is very simple. I will pay whatever I have to pay to be able to watch every Arsenal game, preseason, FA Cup, League Cup, Europa Nations Conference wide where we play FC Middle Earth, whatever it is. And so
there's actually a team in that conference called Younger Boys. They're even worse than Young Boys. They're the leaders in the clubhouse to win that. But.
Great. Again, not touching the Young Boys content. But the
nice choice of
the
word.
way, and now that I hear it, that was bad. But anyway, literally wasn't even meant that way. There's no good way to talk about that club without sounding like you're saying something offensive. But what I will say is simply that I think there is a calculus, especially for subscription services, where the one thing that guarantees you have a viewer who will not leave, and you don't have to pay £100 million for the Lord of the Rings series, and you don't have to pay $200 million to a Game of Thrones producer to make more Game of Thrones content, is you buy a live sport, you broadcast a live sport, and that audience is captive, and they will stay with you even if there's nothing else on the platform you want. So I think there is an argument for these big streamers to have, live content that draws in a captive audience. And so, it's a long way of saying I think that can be handled. I think the interesting thing is where they say the renewal of key commercial agreements or similar improved terms. I have a much bigger question about Arsenal as a brand and their pull for commercial agreements. Yeah. We have lagged behind our rivals for years, and now, given our standing within football generally, I don't see how we close that gap. That's the one I'd be more concerned about, because the broadcast revenues, I'm not concerned about loss of revenue that impacts all clubs equally. So you'd say stadium revenue loss impacts clubs differently because they have different sized stadiums and get different amounts, but everybody's going through it. Broadcast loss, again, impacts slightly differently based on the way that the broadcast revenues are split, but impacts everyone. Commercial loss impacts us more than our rivals because of the deterioration in our brand equity. That's where I really worry about catching up.
And that is a exacerbating situation as our team continues to become less attractive. I was going to use a different word, but less attractive than others to advertisers who want to be the new generation of being on shirts that are going to be popular around the world. I mean, there was a point at which Chelsea didn't have advertising money because no one would wear their shirt because no one knew who they were. And about 5 or 10 years after they started buying trophies, they became a commercial success as a result, because people became, the world woke up and understood that Chelsea was one of the big boys now. So, the thing about the TV deals, and this brings up Mike Herz's question, whether it's a value to ESPN or Sky to get the money, or no, whether it's a value to ESPN or NBC to get the money from Fios, from DirecTV, from the providers, isn't necessarily felt, I don't think, by the Premier League. So, it allows the price that they pay to be higher, but it doesn't necessarily drive the marketability higher as it relates directly to the Premier League. I just think that ultimately everything that goes up eventually must come down to some extent. And the one thing that I've been keeping my eye on the last 5 or 6 years is just the insane growth of the TV contracts, and knowing that, there's got to be some point at which it levels off, or even recedes for one reason or another. And as Mike asks, if the TV deal goes down drastically, will clubs have to sell high earners or renegotiate contracts? I think the answer to that is some clubs, absolutely. I mean, what do you think, Elliot? I mean, let's say the projections all of a sudden for the next few years are that the TV revenues are cut by 30%, which for some clubs can mean 8 figures, hundreds of millions of pounds.
So here's the issue, right? I think there's essentially two points to this, and it sort of goes back to what I was touching on before, Mike, which is that if the revenues for the league and all the teams in the league go down for everybody, right? If the TV contracts are dramatically reduced, or if for some reason stadiums can't get open a lot longer, I don't see that happening.
It'll probably hurt the lower teams more than it will I mean, it'll hurt like the Bournemouths of the world much more than it would.
The obvious answer is just that player wages will be depressed. Players just won't be able to, transfer fees will go down and player wages will go down. Now, there are clubs. Manchester City would be one. Chelsea at some points in time could be another. Manchester United might be one, just in terms of the absolute extraordinary commercial revenues they have, where that's not felt as strongly. But again, because it's a market, if other clubs can only pay £80,000 a week and City can pay 120, they'll pay 120 instead of a scenario where other teams can pay 120 and City pay 180. It will have a depressing effect on wages and transfer fees is what will ultimately happen.
Whether it impacts current players, like whether you all of a sudden end up in a situation where Tottenham's got to sell off their 3 most earning players because of it. I mean, I think that's going to be a function of whether you see it coming or not. And these clubs aren't just walking through with blinders on as to what's going to happen. So, planning for the future has a lot to do with it. Resources have a lot to do with it. And I mean, the more I think about it, the more I worry that if that happens without an accompanying change in the revenue sharing in the Premier League, you're going to get this happen. And all of a sudden it's going to be back to top 3 or top 4, and then everyone else with a huge gap in between, which is exactly
that'll
what
be driven on by 2 things, right? By gate ticket receipts and by commercial revenues, because ultimately that's where the big clubs can really distance themselves. I think what happens is when TV revenues are 80% of revenue, you close the gap and you have parity. When TV revenues are 20% of revenue, you expand the gap and you don't have parity. Do you agree with that, right? Because then what's happening is as TV revenues grow as a percentage of overall revenue, it levels the playing field throughout the league. As TV revenues shrink,
assuming it's not distributed like it is in Spain, yes.
Right, but it's not, right? I mean, right. So under the Premier League model, as TV revenues shrink, the gap widens because the other areas have greater disparity, commercial and ticket sales, right? Because bigger clubs have bigger stadiums, they have bigger commercial deals. I think you're right that the knock-on effect of a massive reduction in TV revenues would be the reemergence of a major gap, because the big clubs would have comparatively speaking, much bigger revenues at that point. So, I mean, the question then is, how good or bad is that for us, and where do we fit in that equation vis-a-vis commercial revenue?
Yeah, and is the asset, for Avon's question, is the value of Arsenal as an asset tied to the TV revenue? It's not meant to be completely tied to the TV revenue, and I'll be honest with you that, I mean, TV revenue is probably the thing that most would drive the desire to remain competitive and the urge to get to regain competitive advantage, which is something that we've been dealing with the last few years. The one thing that I think would I guess encourage people who want us to not just become a mid-table team for years and years going forward is that I think this is true to an extent. The TV revenue is a massive part of our overall turnover, although game day wages are also high. But TV revenue is more than likely at least 40 or 50% of the club's total income. So I don't know if people are going to start rooting against TV revenue contracts so that they're in hopes that Kroenke will sell or not. But I do think that the value of Arsenal or any other football club is significantly tied to TV revenues, because without TV revenues growing as they had in the last 15 years, you would not see the exchange of players for the fees that they are.
But, all right,
and of course, the players that are being exchanged have had a massive impact on the quality on the pitch.
Can I push back on that just slightly? Only in the sense that, like the size of TV revenues, as far as I can tell, doesn't actually have any real impact on the value of the asset if clubs are still running at break even or a loss, right? Because it's not like the U.S. model where these teams just bank cash year in, year out. I mean, you look at these Premier League teams, and most of them are running break even or a loss or a small profit. So yes, they can afford to pay players more, but if TV revenues collapse, you just pay players less and you pay smaller fees. I mean, they're not going to collapse below what they are in Europe, right? Below what they are in Italy and Spain and France. So you're still always going to have that comparative advantage, especially in terms of commercial revenues and ticket sales. So I guess I would ask why it has to impact the asset value, especially if you view it cyclically, because ultimately, like if you look at Arsenal, you say, oh, they have all these TV revenues. That's great for asset value. And you say, well, why? They're not making a profit. It's not applying to their bottom line. At the end of the day, it doesn't help their bottom line.
Yeah, no, that's actually a better.
I'll look at it this way. So think of it as inflation, right? What happened when TV revenues went up? Did the club suddenly become more profitable? No. Suddenly mediocre players became $30 million purchases, and good play like Pepe is $72 million. Well, let's put Pepe aside. He's a weird one, right? But like what Everton paid for Alex Iwobi is a legacy of the TV revenues going up, right? Alex Iwobi 10 years ago, and you can say, well, there's also inflation. Set that aside. The point is, TV revenues going up had one effect that I can see. Wages and fees going up. It didn't have the effect of the clubs being more profitably run.
You're absolutely correct with that, and I think part of my initial view on that is I'd revise that, because you're absolutely correct. There's an indirect level of it as well, which is that the increased money to spend has ultimately allowed for some clubs, Wolves, maybe Everton, to get themselves into a category of Premier League clubs that increase their global fan base value, increase their ability to get to Europe value.
Yes.
So indirectly, I think the fact that they're able to spend more money on better players and become more regular appearers in the top 6 or top 8 of the table, that increases club values in ways that probably lead towards commercial success and worldwide branding. But you're absolutely right. For every dollar extra and that was my entire point earlier, for every extra dollar that the teams are getting in TV revenue, they're spending them right out the door in players. And so you're right. That isn't a way to build value from a profitability standpoint.
And can I give you just sort of a basic example, like a human example? You make $1 million a year. I make $500,000 a year. Your lifestyle and my lifestyle.
That's actually, but chat, that is, I mean, I wasn't
100% accurate. Yeah.
I did not want Elliot to disclose that to the public, but
100% accurate. Yeah.
We're releasing our financial statements tomorrow.
There you go. That's my financial statement. So you make $1 million a year and I make $500,000 a year. Your lifestyle is going to be dramatically different than mine. Okay. But now we both get a contract that's governing a bunch of people. And as a result of this contract, we each make $50 million a year more. So now I make $50,500,000 and you make $51 million. Suddenly, there's basically no difference between us, right?
Right.
We're basically the same in what we can spend and what we can do.
I went from being twice as well off as you to being like 2% better.
Exactly. Now that $50 million contract goes away. And what we revert to is a situation where you have a great deal more financial leverage over me, economic power, ability to spend, ability to comparably spend. So I guess what I'm saying is that it is the massive TV contracts, while they're good for all the clubs, are actually comparably better for the smaller clubs because it allows them to close the gap through the dynamic that I just described to you.
Absolutely. And the loss of that would be therefore much more damaging to the smaller clubs, just as the loss of game day revenues is larger in nominal dollars to an Arsenal.
Yes.
But a killer to a team like Charlton Athletic, or although they've just gotten new investment, but a team like Northampton Town or Gillingham more than likely, because the relationship between game day revenues and their overall turnover was so much more valuable.
Here's what we're missing, I think, and
I know you've got to go, but as long as you keep talking, I'll have you.
I'll talk for just another minute here, because I think there's one thing that we're missing that this statement on the screen doesn't necessarily capture, although I'm sure you'll get to it, but that really is where you distinguish. If you're a small club that has to run with the cash you're able to raise, has to run within your means at some level, right? The loss of the TV revenues isn't just an accounting problem. It is a real problem in operating your club with the contracts you presently have and the contracts you want to sign. Arsenal have this deus ex machina economically, which is Stan Kroenke. They have a billionaire. They have all the money they could ever want. They could spend more than not more than Manchester City, but they could spend like Manchester City if they actually wanted to do that. And again, I'm not saying Stan should. I'm not saying that should be the model. That's not my point. My point is, the real problem you have if there's destabilization of the TV contracts is that these small clubs that are tied into inflated wages that have been inflated by the growth in TV contracts and don't have some billionaire sugar daddy that can backstop losses, if the TV revenue craters, they're going to have trouble making ends meet in a very immediate and real way, in addition to the economic problem that's been built up by not having fans in the stands and all that. Whereas in Arsenal, whatever the paperwork says, has an Abramovich, has a Sheikh Mansour, has someone who can just say, I'll backstop, and maybe it's done in the form of debt that's put on the club or however it's done. You see my point, Mike, which is that the real crisis here, and the reason why a Super League is being discussed, and the reason why teams floated the idea of changing the way TV revenues are shared, is because these teams recognize that the way it's structured right now is going to always force the big clubs to spend to their bottom line, never be profitable. And I don't think that these big clubs, certainly the American owners, don't want to run that way. They don't inherently want to run a business where to be competitive at the top, you have to run at a loss. It's not how it works in America, and I'm sure it's not how they want it to work in football.
Yeah, very well put. And I think is that your swan song for joining us today?
Yeah, it is. And I probably did not make that as lucid as I wanted to, but I'm into my second hour here of live streaming, which neither hour of which was planned. So I appreciate you asking me to hop on. I'm sorry that I derailed it to the point where you haven't gotten off page one yet, but I will be watching this when we're done, gleaning the information, then spitting it back out on our podcast on Monday. Well,
it's been a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate you being available on such short notice, and we're gonna watch you go out the exit door, and we're gonna bring on one or more additional people to because I just don't fancy potting by myself. I'm just so insecure. I don't want to do that. So
it's no fun. Well, I appreciate it. It's great to talk to you, Mike, and I hope that the subsequent guests are more articulate, knowledgeable, and effective than the one that's
they're not. But I love them though. So
fair enough. All right. Thanks, man. Cheers. Talk to you soon.
Take care, Elliot.
Bye.
Have a good one. I had to insult you just as I'm getting ready to bring you on. Mikey Herz, thank you for joining me.
Where's Andy?
Not your normal background, but I'm so desperate for company that I brought you on, even though you like jazz. So now to what was his name? To the gentleman who confused us earlier today. Now you can see the difference between the nasty Mike and the good Mike.
Yes,
I'm the nasty one. All right,
definitely. So I'm the one with the hair, as you put it.
Yes, you're the one who with the hair, the jazz, and the 46 kids from one wife, whereas I have 2 kids from 46 wives. All right, so let's get back on track here. Just just going to go through the financial statements. We went down a couple of rabbit holes that were 100% worth going down. And I appreciate Elliot being on the show to talk about those. So let's take a quick look. Where am I here? Okay, so we've talked about the risks to the team. Here is kind of what I was talking about. The Premier League secured TV rights sales for the 3-year cycle ending after next season. Certain overseas rights are already secured for a longer term, but we could go down an entire hour on whether whether revenues from TV contracts are going to go up, go down before. Arsenal as a club does not expect there to be a material impact from Brexit, otherwise known as the UK's departure from the European Union. So says the club's participation in European competition, subject to the usual qualification criteria, is expected to continue as opposed to Brexit somehow shutting that down. That isn't them saying that we expect to continue to be in Europe. That's them saying that we don't think that Brexit's going to change whether British clubs are in Europe or not. This is an important distinction. All right. So here's the statement on supporters. And if you're just listening rather than watching this, I'll include it. So our fans are the lifeblood of the club, and we're grateful for their unrelenting, faithful support, even more so whilst we play behind closed doors. Despite the challenging circumstances, we're committed to maintaining an open dialogue with our supporters. This comes to life through our Arsenal Fans Forum, which we hold 3 times a year, enabling fans to put questions to and discuss key issues with our chief executive and other senior club officials. In addition, we keep in regular contact with our supporters through our membership schemes and our network of 185 supporters clubs around the world. Mike, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but that last sentence there, through our membership schemes and our network of 185 supporters clubs around the world, I anticipate in the next week or two having on Amar Hajani, who is the director of that specific area of focus, ticket sales and kind of fan relations. I think it should be a good chat if we're able to have it. Most of all, we came to contact with each other because of the ultimate retention of Mark Brindle, who is the club's fan supporter liaison and an amazing person, a lifelong Gooner, and part of the reason why those 185 supporters clubs feel such a close connection to the club. So, obviously this statement was put out before any of those decisions were made, but I just want to compliment the club on keeping Mark involved. So, Mike, do you think this is a strong enough statement? I mean, this isn't necessarily the only place that they can make this statement, but what do you think about the nod to the supporters here?
No, I think it's always good. I think there's a lot of part of the fan base that always feels a little bit disconnected, as unfortunately the world and finances take the club to more of a business type of standpoint. So normally you go into big business to kind of start neglecting the fans or essentially the customer, right? In this circumstance. So the fact that they still decided to kind of throw a nod to the supporters and just remind them and say, hey, you guys are important. And if things go well with the vaccine rollout, and I'm hearing that the last game of the season might potentially have fans, I think that's going to be massive as well, as far as, the downfall that you and Elliot were talking about the TV deals extensively, which I wanted to, I'll go back to ask you a question about that just occurred to me when Elliot's final statement. But I think it's very important, and I think they have been doing a better job at kind of keeping the fans involved. Maybe not as frequent as some fans may like, but as far as, statements at least once, twice, 3 times a year, the fact that they always make time to, just nod to the fans, say, hey, you guys are important, you guys are the bloodline, which is very important. I think some fans kind of panicked a little bit with the whole product turning into more of a TV thing, and I understand that some of the local supporters feel a little bit maybe squeezed out in the sense that they feel like their voice has been suppressed. I don't think it's that much.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that, Mike, because that is a massive and valid concern of the people who, would consider themselves the lifeblood of the club not growing up historically, has been the local fans, and as the global the global brand, not the global gland, the global brand has grown. Arsenal's been very aware of that and very in tune with their global brand growth, possibly to the exclusion and oversight of the bread and butter. And while I'm part of the global brand growth category, and you are as well, I know a lot of people who are in that kind of, we've been there since, and if you go back in the generations of the families, we've been there since the turn of the century. We've been there in the 70s and 80s when there wasn't so much money coming from overseas. We've been home and away for 30 years, and we don't, there's these Arsenal fan forums, but we don't get the chance to do this, do that, do the other thing that, have the access that all these fans do. I think the club could be doing a lot better in that, in making sure that they're match going, the people that are there day in and day out, who are there because of circumstance of location, because of financial capabilities, whatever it is, neither better nor worse fans, but being ignored, I think is I feel for that.
I think they're lacking a little balance in that sense, Mike, because you mentioned the last couple of years, well, not last year, it was canceled, but when they come down to America, right, all the fan forums they do, all the questioning, and it's great that we have access. And I think looking at it at a business perspective, I think what it is that they're targeting that away market, right? Because they know that the way things are going, they're catering a little bit more to the TV deals and the viewership that they get, the ratings and all that, right? So what they did is they went a little bit too extreme on pleasing, for lack of a better word, trying to grasp more of the market share when it comes to foreign fans. But yeah, to your point, it's nice that they issue a statement, but more things locally would be a massive plus. And I guess I'm going to throw in this guy's name in just because I feel like he needs some love after the last couple of weeks. You got to appreciate Hector Bellerin. He seems to be very involved with a lot of fan things. So I'm just going to throw his name into the conversation just because he seems to, if the club isn't the one asking him to do it, he seems to find a way to be involved with supporters, which is pretty cool for a modern footballer to still do that.
Yeah, and and again, that's also a double-edged sword. Are they doing it for the club's benefit or for their own brand? I would argue that we only need to look at Mesut Ozil to see somebody who was very active with Arsenal fans, just for his own purposes and not for the club's. In fact, counter to the club's purposes. But true. In any case, that's another rabbit hole. But I think that this statement is good to see in a financial statement. But actions speak louder than words. I met personally through fortune of being in credentialed media for the summer tour in 2019 when the U.S. came, and I had an occasion to have a number of conversations with Vinay and with other members of the staff and the executive board. And what came from them in that environment was, we understand that we need to be much better with transparency and communications, and maybe in non-traditional ways, not just through interviews with the Athletic and as good as those are, interviews with the Athletic, interviews with the Guardian, with Daily Mail, and doing those kinds of controlled media releases, but maybe some, somewhere in between the fans forum and print media, which of course is new media, podcasts, blogs, that sort of thing. And to be fair and objective, while I still see an opportunity to do that, and while I got a lot of positive statements from them in what was almost 2 years ago now, I have not seen that change. A lot's happened in the meantime. I understand that. Coaching changes, pandemics, but I think the club really needs to focus on being a little bit more available. And I'm just going to leave it there. There's some excellent questions in the chat, by the way. If I'm not getting to the questions, it's because we are on a limited time frame, and I'm also on a separate screen looking at this document. So please forgive me. I'll try to go back and look at the questions and answer them as best I can, or at least give my opinion on that. Their statement on employees: despite reviewing and evaluating the schemes offered by the government, we decided we would not use the schemes and instead use club funds to protect jobs for as long as possible. We made discretionary payments to our match day and non-match day casual workers during the first 2 lockdown periods in recognition of their contribution and value to the club. Now, this is a statement on a financial statement that ends May 31st, 2020. As we know, the redundancies, the 55, the changes, the Gunnersaurus fiasco, the additional redundancies that we're seeing now, all after the closure of this financial statement. So will this kind of a statement and all that look different for 2021's financial statements that come out this time next year? Absolutely. Quality, diversity, and inclusion, which I would title the Arsenal way. This, I think, is the best thing Arsenal has going for them right now. Historically, I still believe in it. Yeah, we've lost our way a lot when it comes to how the club has handled certain things, but when it comes to diversity and inclusion, I mean, yes, we're a more cutthroat business model. We've become more of a franchise than a club, and I know how much that hurts to hear. But when it comes to treating people the right way from an inclusion standpoint, not necessarily from a business standpoint, I think the club has done very well with that. Just as a note, you've got a Jewish guy and a what do you call yourself? I don't want to say it, but you can say it.
Well, the
abbreviations are FM.
No, it's Chapin. That's a shout for the Central Americans, for the people from Guatemala. That's kind of slang for us. We refer to each other as Chapin. Yeah.
I thought you called it. I thought you called it fake Mexican, but those are your words,
fake,
not mine.
Fake Guatemalan is what I was dubbed by. Was it Ewan Drago, I believe?
I don't know.
I can't even or Owen. I can't even remember. But the fake Guatemalan thing stuck around for a while.
All right. But anyway, my point is, I think that the club does a very good job in both paying lip service and action to the changing world that we live in.
Yeah.
And not everyone loves the changing world that we're in. I get it. Not everyone loves inclusion. Not everyone loves BLM. And I'm not here to opine on that or make a stance on that. I understand there's a lot of controversy, but I think the club's efforts are consistent with the philosophy of this club, and that isn't necessarily found with every other club. So the director's report, I just found this funny. The club continues to be fully compliant with the financial fair play regulations put in place by UEFA and the Premier League, including the amendments to those rules put in place to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic. Well, at least one club is doing that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's nice to know
that's
that
going to upset fans. I think that statement right there, if somebody takes the time to read through this, I think that would only upset fans more and please them. Like,
Can you imagine the statement would be like, the club has finally decided that financial fair play is a sham, and we're going to change the way we go about things. I mean,
yeah, we need
I'd love to see that.
We need the Rams to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
so
let's put some hard truths in there.
Yeah.
Just say that the club. Just say that we're selling all of our players and buying League One players if the Rams don't make the playoffs next year. I mean, just put it out there in writing.
That kill people, dude.
And the Colorado Avalanche, which was I think Andy has left our podcast to do a Colorado Avalanche podcast. That's really what's happened to him.
Well, ever since he discovered that young man that got signed by Arsenal, I think he went full-time agent.
That's right. That's going on. That's another place that he could potentially be. Although, in about 2 hours, you'll see him on this podcast making his triumphant return. So, the director's report. By the way, the directors of the company currently, at the time the report is released, the Kroenke father and son team, Tim Lewis, who was appointed after this statement, and Lord Harris of Peckham. How many Lord Harrises do you think there are? And is Peckham? I mean, Peckham, I think, is a pretty nice area, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that, and I'm sure I'll be corrected. But Lord Harris of Peckham, really, I needed that kind of specificity from them, because I was getting ready to compose emails to Lord Harris of Royal Tunbridge,
yes, and to do that.
it would have fallen on blank ears. It does mention, though, that there were some changes in the board of directors that happened between the time that this was released and now, which is that Sir Chips, who I call Sir Crisps because I'm a Yank, has retired, as well as KJ Ken Fryer, who retired on August 31st, 2020. Whether that retirement was voluntary or whether it was pandemic related or not, I couldn't even possibly get into. But Ken Fryer, just to point out, he was to many people Arsenal. He embodied the Arsenal way. And if you want to learn more about Ken Fryer, if you're not fully aware of his impact on the club, go back and listen at the very beginning of our season, one of the first season 5 podcasts that we did when we had Alan Smith on. The night before Alan Smith signed for Arsenal, he spent the night at Ken Fryer's house and got locked in the toilet. It's a hilarious story, but his fondness for Ken and his part in making our club what it was is worth a casual or perhaps a newer Arsenal fan to learn about. It's part of our club's history. Maybe I've given Peckham too much credit for being a nice area, but again, I only know so much about English geography. This I'm going to try to rush through because it's a lot of numbers on a table. But basically, this is our income statement. This is the money that's been made. Turnover is gross profit. Turnover is going to be broken down on the next page, but it basically contains of every source of revenue that the club has: game day revenues, TV money, commercial revenues, and a few other things. And just so we have something to compare to, in 2019, the year before this came out, we had almost 400 in turnover. United had 590, just due to just being a global marketing machine. City 503, largely due to their commercial revenues and TV money for basically Europe and Premier League success. Liverpool 455, Chelsea 448. Spurs were basically right behind us. When they release their profit and losses for this year, they're going to be ahead of us in turnover. So just brace yourself and get used to it. The average Premier League turnover is 241 million. But 53 million lower revenues from last year to this year, largely as a result of the position in the table, of missing out on the Champions League again, and of the fact that 14 Premier League games, I think, had to be delayed into the next year. Our operating expenses were 15 million higher, so we've got a $68 million crunch on operating losses from 32 million to 98 million. That's a big deal. And it's a big deal because it's going to get bigger in 2021. The only thing that kind of saved our asses a little bit in 2020 was the profit on player registrations, which is something you can't really, it's not as evenly predictable from year to year. We profited 60 million pounds on player registrations through last May, largely because of the sales of Iwobi and Bielik. And there's a handful of others, but whereas the year before we almost broke even. So if not for that, we would have actually had a full loss of nearly 100 million pounds. Instead, it's 47 as opposed to 27 the year before, saved by player registrations. Guess what isn't going to increase in the next financial statement? Sales on player registrations, because who did we sell and for what between May 31st, 2020 and now? Who have we sold over the summer and now?
Nobody. Just
like
a bunch
for
of
money.
loans. Yeah, no, for nobody. We just cut a bunch of people. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, so where's that huge gap going to? Is that just all the season ticket holders that not being able to come into the stadium? Because the TV revenue deal, if I heard correctly, you said it doesn't really end until the end of next month, right? Or next season. So
no, but by the same token, we're not guaranteed X amount for the entirety of the deal. The deal is structured so that your positioning in the league determines how much money you get. How far you go in Europe determines how much money you get. So, for example, what is in that revenue for that year is I believe the money that was received as a result of getting to the Europa League final, which is nowhere near what it would have been to getting to the Champions League round of 16, but still, the Europa League final revenue is in there. The finishing, what did we finish that season? 5th, I believe. That was Unai Emery's full season. That money's in there. But next year, the 8th place money will be in there. And I think we finished 7th or 8th in the Premier League last year. I think it was
8th. Was
it 8th, and we got into Europe because of the FA Cup.
Yes.
So, 7th or 8th place finish. The round of 32 exit to Olympiacos will be in there next season, and the cost of the of whatever happens in the Europa League this season will be in there. So it's going to be the volatility of the financial statement between this year and next year is going to be massive, and that'll be the case for many clubs, but especially us because of basically we've been sliding down in revenues as a result of our performance, not just as a result of COVID. So yeah, I mean the loss of commercial income due to COVID, again, it's only slightly shown in here because there were really only maybe 7 home games that were lost as a result of COVID, if that.
This upcoming summer
on this financial statement.
So this upcoming summer is, we better hit the nail on the head, right? Otherwise, next summer it seems that all clubs are going to be massively in pain with everything that we're seeing here. Yeah, assuming that the TV deals change and everything. We don't have full attendance in the stadiums. So as far as AFC goes, right?
Next year's financial statements for a club like Manchester City are going to be glorious, despite the pandemic.
True.
The only negative impact on them is going to be game day revenues, but they're gonna win the Premier League, and the TV money for winning the Premier League is enormous. They're going to potentially get to glory in the Champions League, and unless I'm completely missing something and they've been knocked out already, but I'm pretty sure they haven't been. In fact, nobody's been knocked out that made the group stage. So,
EFL
I mean,
final.
All of those things are still on the table for them and would be reflected on the next year. So they're going to have financials that could have been better if not for the loss of game day revenue, but they're still going to be dramatically better than a team like Arsenal, who's had the loss of revenue and cascading reductions in television revenues because of our performance on the pitch. So that's that is not good news, and it's every reason why our Spain in Europe, for one, try somehow, I guess, to make the Champions League, which would lead towards prioritizing the Europa League. But they're not going to be okay finishing 9th or 10th or 8th and not winning the Europa League. That's going to be a major problem. Enough to sell the club? No, but it's going to be a major problem on profits next year.
Yeah, don't give people hopes about selling the club. I think
this club is not going to be sold.
No, I think there's a lot of upswing still to be. There's still a lot of money to be met, so I don't think this is going through a rough patch. People like Kroenke don't sell for 2-3 years worth of a loss, I believe. This is all just long-term planning on their end.
Okay, yeah, and I'm going to abbreviate the remainder of the information on here, but the one thing I do want to show, this is kind of a demonstration of what turnover is. This is actually where our revenue comes from and why it's dropped so sharply in the last year by 51 million, even before COVID really came into play. Match day revenues, this is based on COVID. This is based on probably not completely based on COVID, but this is based on losing, maybe 7 to 12 home matches that would have been on last year's books that instead just were lost altogether. Broadcasting revenues, this is as a result of our poorer performance in the prior year. That's all it's based on. Look at the significant drop there. It's 54 million pounds of lost broadcasting revenues solely because we finished 5th in the league and we were in the Europa League final. This does not take into account finishing 8th in the league belts for 2021 numbers on this line. Commercial revenues, saving grace, increased by 32 million because of the renewal of the Adidas deal or Adidas deal, if you want to call it that, the stadium naming rights. Again, whether we're falling behind other teams in those areas, that's a debate. But that was an increase in commercial revenue, and without that, we would have been really screwed as far as turnover is concerned. These are almost insignificant. Property development and player trading in this context is not a huge deal. So, turnover dropping from 395 to 344 wouldn't surprise me to see that number well under 300 million next season. While I would still expect to see Manchester City, Liverpool, and other teams north of 500 million, and that's a warning bell. That is a big warning bell. Not this kind of bell, but a warning bell. Total operating expenses in the meantime, while revenues went down 51 million, operating expenses went up 15 million. So again, you can see where the crunches are happening here. Exceptional costs, what they call exceptional costs, where are those? In the current year are attributable to the changes to the first team management, coaching, and support staff. Where you see exceptional costs, that's basically the costs that we have to pay off Unai Emery and his staff. So, that's exceptional costs. I don't think that's particularly exceptional, but that's what that refers to. And so just real quick to run down the balance sheet, cash on hand. This is how much money we have in the bank, as Elliot was referring to before. 167 million down to 110 million, and a lot of obligations coming due in the next few years. So, to the extent that I usually argue against, we have to sell bodies before we can bring someone in, I may have to revisit that stance because, while, and really it isn't that we have to sell bodies before they can come in because we have no money. It's we have to sell bodies before they come in or get owner investment. And owner investment is basically what happened this summer in order to close the Thomas Partey deal. And so that's that's an interesting part of it. What I'm going to do, there's a few other things here. By the way, changes in equity. This is essentially what the actual stock in the company is worth. This is what the owners. This doesn't mean the market value of what you could sell the club for. This is the actual value of the equity in the club after profit and loss, after the what the par value of the shares are and all that. 2 years ago, well, it's almost 3 years ago, but two statements ago, 420 million pounds. A year, 393 million pounds. Now 345 million pounds. If you want to know what the value of the club is from like a book value standpoint to the Cronkies, this shows you it is shrinking. So massively. For any of you that might want to know that the Cronkies are losing value, there it is. Again, market value isn't the same though. I could have a company that's losing money left and right, but has such a great product that's being developed that 10 years from, Amazon was losing money at one point. In the late 90s, I believe, tremendous amounts of money because they were building something huge. It doesn't mean that the company wasn't worth $100 billion. It just meant that they weren't making money. So take this with a grain of salt. But the good news is the going concern means, can the company continue to exist? Is Arsenal going to fold? The answer is no. Arsenal's not going to fold. So good luck in that. Good in that regard. But apparently they are stress testing some of the worst possible things: staying out of Europe, television money going down, all of those things. And ultimately, even with all of those things happening, they're not worried about the clubs being lost. Mikey, I've been private messaging you, but I'm going to ask you: do you have time for a few more minutes, or do you got to run?
No, I'm good for another 15 minutes, man. I'm using my phone, so I couldn't figure out how to actually message you back.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I gave you like a nod, but when I got the message on my watch, yeah, man, keep on going. I'm so
From
good.
now on, I think we should only communicate on live podcasts. I want you to stop DMing me and sending me messages.
Obviously,
and stuff.
I'll FaceTime you every time. Yeah.
Okay. And if someone else DMs you by accident, intending it for me, we'll do a live pod while you read it out.
That was brilliant.
This is interesting to me, and it has to do with player costs. Well, this particular statement actually is just a regurgitation of what I was talking about before. The cost of acquiring players' registrations is capitalized and amortized in equal installments over the period of the respective players' contracts. So, like Elliot was saying before, if we sign a 200 million pound player over 10 years, It's costing us $20 million a year. We could probably afford to do that, assuming the player doesn't, turn into a complete schmuck. But 10-year contracts are also not agreed to by players because it gives them very little ability to renegotiate. So, the longer the contract, the less it's costing us each year, in financial terms anyway. But where the sale of a player, where the acquisition of a player registration involves a non-cash consideration, such as the exchange for another player registration, the transaction is accounted for using an estimate of the market value for the non-cash consideration. So, a few months ago, when everyone was claiming all the players that we'd given away for free, and there's a lot of them, and our player trading has been diabolical.
There it is.
People wanted to throw Alexis. People wanted to throw Alexis in there like we gave him away for nothing. Now, there's hindsight involved in that, and you can say that when you consider that Mkhitaryan's contribution to our club's success on the pitch did not amount to very much. But you cannot say that that Alexis is in the same category as Ramsey, Wilshere, Ozil, and all of the others. Essentially, we sold him for an amount that was determined and booked as being £30 million, which went on the books right away, and bought, I think it was 32 actually, and Mkhitaryan was purchased for £32 million over the course of his contract, which I believe was maybe 2 years though. So that was a transaction that had impact. It wasn't just a complete loss, but no one could possibly claim that it was a good outcome for either teams based on how their respective careers with their clubs ended up. But it's an important announce. Another narrative that I want to try to dispel is about Pablo Mari. Further fees will be
there's a lot of things,
under the condition of certain transfer and contract negotiations. Further fees will be payable in the event of the players concerned making a certain number of first-team appearances or on the occurrence of other certain specified future events, such as goals, assists, haircuts, that sort of thing. And they bank those fees when it becomes probable that the number of appearances will be achieved or the specified future events will occur. So for everybody, and I'm looking at you, lead judges, for everybody that love to talk about the fact that somehow, some way, Pablo Mari incurred an injury after his 9th Premier League appearance, when in fact he has a contract based on paying, was it Fluminense or wherever he came from, £1 billion when he hits 10 appearances. If you think that he was kept out of games for a month as he was, not for an injury, but because they didn't want to pay the £1 million, have a word with yourself. Because after 9 games and re-signing his contract, unless Arsenal never ever planned on playing him again in the future, that fee had already been booked. Paid, no, but booked, yes. And once it's booked, it's assumed to be paid at some point. So that's just one of the things that needles me. I mean, I know it makes for good, good rants, but Pablo Mari, I believe in a lot of conspiracies about things going on in the dressing room and otherwise. I tend to buy into them a lot. What I don't buy into is stuff like this, because that $1 million was already spent, and probably the next $1 million's already been spent as well. Also, and this was fascinating, the group will perform an impairment review. An impairment review if adverse events indicate that the value of its assets may not be recoverable, not on an individual basis, but on a global scale. Such circumstances might include a player being excluded from the playing squad due to a career-threatening injury, or where a permanent fallout with senior football management means it's highly unlikely a particular player will ever play for the club again. That's amazing to see in a financial statement. Maybe it's not unusual, but I mean, this is the Mesut Ozil and Socrates clause here.
Does it say Ozil in there?
I wish it said Ozil, but I'm saying it says Ozil here. These are my notes.
Crossword. If you're gonna find like Ozil, like Ozil somewhere down there,
right? So in this again, this is year ending 2020. So this doesn't include Ozil's freeze out, because essentially Ozil played in the last available game that we played during this financial year. In fact, I was there. I saw him. He actually got his first assist of the season. and then that was that. But this talks about the policy of the team to have something called impairments, which are those are basically sunk costs that they look at for players who either get permanently injured and can never play again, or people with, well, okay, I'm not even going to go there. People like Mesut Ozil, Socrates, possibly. I don't know if Guendouzi would be included in that because I don't think that's been. I mean, Arteta's comments from recently make it clear he's not going to be back. So maybe actually it might include that contract. Mustafi, probably not, because he was still on the active roster for a while. But none of those impairments occurred during this financial year. They all occurred during the following financial year. So one of the things I'm going to be most interested in looking at, because I'm a geek, when the next financial statement comes out, is how much of a write-down and an impairment those contracts had, because that's going to be a significant change to our normal financial statements in that they've just really cleared out a lot of the deadwood. And just the fact that they actually say that in the case of a player who has fallen out with senior management, either the agreed selling price or the estimation of disposal value is going to be coming into play. So the deadwood clear out that we saw in January and the deadwood clear out we'll probably see over this summer. Well, actually, the summers won't appear on the next one, but this one will. And I find that really, really interesting. So employees, this is the number of employees prior to the redundancies. Playing staff, fairly constant. Training staff went down a bit. Commercial administrative staff, fairly stable prior to the redundancies. So the redundancies will show up. These numbers will be much lower next year. Ground staff stayed about the same. That will also go down next year. So, we employ 700 some odd people, probably now in the 600s, which is much, much larger than most clubs do. So when we think about 55 redundancies, do actually consider that in some cases there may be a significant bloat of our staff compared to other clubs, even the clubs that are bigger than us. That doesn't mean that on an individual basis it doesn't suck to be made redundant, but it does mean that some redundancies were probably there. I just don't disagree with all of the redundancies, specifically the one they were considering for supporters-based people. Like Mark, but that's another story. Exceptional costs, $9.5 million. That's Unai Emery and friends right there. And I remember a couple years ago the exceptions were more they were like 16 to 20 million, and that was Arsene Wenger and friends. So that's an interesting thing here. And you want to know what people make. Directors' emoluments in this case meaning salaries, wages, that sort of thing. For this year, the directors included the two Cronkies, Sir Crisps, Ken Fryer, and the aforementioned Lord Harris of the not as nice but gradually becoming nice area of Peckham, as I've learned. Shrunk from 1.5 million to 529,000. 529,000 amongst all of the emoluments, the largest one of them being 435,000 for the highest paid director. The interesting thing is they don't mention who the highest paid director is, and I don't automatically assume it's Stan. Stan, if he wanted to take money out of the club, and we've seen him take a consulting fee before, he could do that without it being through salary. So I actually tend to think that maybe that 435,000 of directors is more than likely Sir Chips and Ken, or actually Sir Chips or Ken. But anyway, that's going to change because the directors now are the Cronkies, Tim Lewis, and Lord Harris, I believe. So that's going to change significantly as Tim Lewis came in the door after this. Key management personnel, which includes the board of directors and the head of football and managing director, total annual income dropped from 4 million to 2.8 million. The people included in the 2.8 million are likely Vinay and Raul, possibly Edu as well. I think based on the timing, it would be him as well. Next year, it's just going to be Vinay and Edu. So that's an interesting number to watch as well. And I think we'll finish on this, and then I'll be happy to go to any of the questions that have been asked. I've been on a different page, so I haven't seen them, but I will. these are all the companies that Arsenal owns. Obviously, all of the holding companies, the real estate companies, the stadium, Arsenal. One of the ones that people don't realize is that they made a 1% purchase of the Gooners podcast, and they've written it down as being dormant AF. So while we appreciated the investment, they've done absolutely nothing to support us. They've supported our charity quite well, as a matter of fact. So I better make that said. But so of our companies, we feel kind of like the redheaded stepchild of Arsenal Holdings. So the rest is really kind of unnecessary to talk about. So Mike,
so a few questions.
I like doing podcasts that don't have real like it's more kind of take your own feedback from it. Like, what do you think of it? Not necessarily me telling you what to think of it. So Mike, what do you think of it? Where does this leave you? Especially considering the fact that these numbers are 9 months old, and things have not exactly improved since then.
I think, you mentioned Alex, he will be there in one part. I think it's going to be massive for us that upcoming season that we have, or this upcoming summer. We have tons of sellable assets that do seem that they're going to be going out the door. So I think that might be a saving grace for us, for shit not hitting the fan too hard, so to say, because you think about
keep in mind what you're talking about is true. It's valid. I think it will help. It will not appear on the next financial statement.
Yeah,
it'll appear on the one after that. So, I mean, that's not to discount it, but I'm just it's not going to help our numbers next year. It'll help our competitive balance. Hopefully, it'll help our player trading, but it won't help our actual statement next time. And let's be honest, I don't care more about the statement than the product. Believe me, this happens to be about the statement, but you're headed in the right direction. I just wanted to kind of point that caveat out, because finally we're gonna.
I guess
we sold players 2 years ago. We sold shit for nothing this year, but I think that the days of that are finally behind us.
I think we're going to benefit from having a fairly young squad. I understand that we have like one or two like aging veterans at this point. Luis is still up in the air whether we're going to keep him, but I'm only just thinking about like squad building, looking at the assets that we do currently have. So what I mean by all this is, it happened a year or so ago with Real Madrid, where they went, I think, 1 or 2 summers with literally not purchasing a single player. I don't understand the circumstances that were surrounding them. But I'm going to say, as far as remaining competitive, so to say, this season has proven to us that, with a healthy Tierney, Staka, et cetera, all the young talent that we have, it might not hurt us to an extent that maybe, we're going to have to do like a fire sale in that sense. So I think that's looking at it in a positive way, I would say. But yeah, I think if the way those numbers looked, you're describing a lot of deficit, and it seems like it's going to only be worse next year. I would say buckle up, fans, and don't expect a huge news of war chest and everything. They're going to have to. How would I say this, Mikey? They're going to have to find that money somewhere, right? I mean, I think they're fine, lack of better words. They understand that there's going to be a loss, and they understand where it's coming from, but I don't think it's going to continue to be that way. So all of a sudden, Mike, with all this information that you've given me, I'm like, holy shit, Europa League's not much more important this season. Just
that and I mean it's kind of scary, because the dynamic is this: the best thing for the club would be to pull out to punch above our weight, basically, at this point, to pull out a Europa League final, get into the Champions League while really not yet being that good. But that also could potentially stunt the panic that the Cronkies are having and saying we got to spend money to get back to that point. So it's an interesting. It's like a double-edged sword. I think that they will. Sorry, go ahead.
There was a lag. Sure. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Sorry. I was gonna say that this past season that Kroenke did make a actual investment himself in the signing of Partey. This is I kind of wonder. This is knowing him. It's well established that he's not like a football guy. I wonder if he laid out that investment and he sees how the season is playing out, but he himself doesn't take into consideration the fact that Partey's been out for a grand majority of the season. I wonder how he views that. Like, does that fill him with confidence to go back and say, okay, I'm going to push forward. I'm going to, one more signing will tip the scale. So I kind of wonder, because he's not a football person, if his interpretation of this investment might be, well, that was a big waste of money, right?
Well, there are plenty of football people who couldn't care less, who just look at the fact that we're 10th in the league and hanging on by a thread in the Europa League, and don't care how it came to be that we got there, and that and what's gone wrong and what's happened, and they would consider those things excuses, and to be fair, they are to a certain extent, but. I think he's got people at least in his ear. I think Josh understands. I think Tim Lewis understands, because Tim is a lifelong Arsenal fan who understands football. He's not there to run the club's football operations, but he is minding the till. So I think that a lot of faith and a lot of pressure right now is on. And that's why we're not ripping up the Mikel Arteta thing and starting over again. I mean, if you've ever needed more of an example of why they're not going to sack him right away, it's because they see that changes are being made, and there may be a lag between the changes being made and the appearance on the pitch and in the standings. And there is certainly a further lag between improvement in those areas and the money coming in from that improvement. So, I think that they're recognizing that we're at the bottom of a very deep chasm that's been building for a number of years. And that's why I've changed my tune to the fact that I used to think when the revenue started going down, the expenditures would go down to match, and we'd end up potentially, a club that paid players no more than 100 grand a week again. And as a result, finished 10th, 12th, 13th in the league. That was my worry when we dropped out of the Champions League. I think this ownership is desperate to get back in the Champions League, and understands that there may be a few years of having to accept losses that come to be because of player trading, where we're having a significant net spend, and we go from there. So it should be an interesting time coming up.
I think Josh mentioned it to you as well, right? When you got the chance to interview him in Denver, where he said we have a Champions League squad with a Europa League wages, right? Or we have Champions League.
We have a Europa League squad on a Champions League budget.
There you go.
And we still have kind of a borderline Champions League budget, and we may not even have a Europa League squad. So it's only gotten worse since then, and I think they're still trying to figure out. Yeah. It's a crazy time. I'm going to try to get to any of the comments and things that were mentioned in the chat. If you have to run, Mike, I know it's in the middle of your workday, and that you actually work, whereas I apparently just screw around all day. But
I got a solid 10 minutes for questions, because I always
Europa League final I think pays less than Champions League round of 16. I'm pretty sure that's true, Aston, and I saw some numbers on that, and it's just. That it's such. I mean, now you know why it was so important that Arsenal put all that faith, especially during a transition in ownership, in Arsene Wenger, and why fourth place was a trophy to Arsenal. People don't like to hear it, but and people don't care that it makes more money. They just that money isn't theirs to spend. So I get the narrative, but to the club, very, very vital to stay in the Champions League every year, and I think that masked a lot of the crumbling infrastructure when we did keep making that Champions League in the final years of Arsene Wenger's contract, because the money came in, but the team was crumbling around it. And years later, we see the impact of that.
I think the disconnect between that concept of Champions League was a trophy was we weren't seeing direct upgrades in our squad. I don't want to get into too much of the Arsene Wenger thing and recruiting and all that, but I think it's safe to say that we made a lot of mistakes recruiting, and we spent a lot of seasons where glaring issues weren't getting covered. So when you're hearing Champions League is like a trophy, you understanding the financial upswing of it, but then you don't necessarily see the squad really improving. I think that's what really kind of got to the fans. Where even I look, I'm fairly positive, but like we go back to that fateful summer when we only signed Petr Cech.
Yeah,
dude, you don't turn around and tell the fans that Champions League is important, and then spend 10 million.
Yeah. 80% of what the club says, and by the club, I'm also including its manager and its figureheads, 80% of what they say is generally taken out of context into the worst possible context. But that doesn't mean that you should still say it and allow that to happen. I mean, Josh, in his interview with us in Denver, he was quoted as saying it's not the fans' job to be obsessing over player transfers and that sort of thing. The fans' job is to come to the stadium and cheer the team on. What he said was that it shouldn't have to fall to the fans to be worried about these things. That should be our job, so that the fans can just come and focus on one job, which is to enjoy the product. And it was taken out of context by, oh my God, by the Sun, can you imagine, as being, and by many people on Twitter as being Josh Kroenke telling people what their job was and to stay out of the club's business. And that couldn't have been further from what he meant. So that's just one example of many where, including Josh, Stan Kroenke saying, I didn't buy the club to win trophies. That was also slightly taken out of context, but not a smart way to have said what he was trying to say. So, I agree that things are taken out of context, but
sorry, I do. I'm sorry. We're working on like a 3-second lag. I'm really sorry about that. I think that only highlights what you were mentioning earlier, that the club should explore different avenues, maybe video, fanism content, just so that people could actually hear the spoken words and they could actually, add some context and nuance to what the person is saying. Because when you read something, it's up to interpretation. So you don't.
That's why when
tone and what she's saying.
That's why back in 2019 when we got to LA, and the reports, the quotes, the articles, even the transcripts from that interview with Josh Kroenke started to come out, it occurred to me that so much of it was being taken out of context. I'm like, I have the video, I have the audio of the interview. I'm going to post it. So I posted it because I'm like, when you hear it, what he was talking about, what he was saying, how he was saying it, you hear the context before and after the quote, unless you are just really looking to vilify the guy for whatever your personal reasons are, you'll understand the context a lot better when you hear it or see it. We don't have video of it, but we have the audio. So, it was a fascinating listen, and I put it out there because I thought a lot of it was being misconstrued, but enough about that. Europa League pays less than Champions League. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Zamir's in the house with his sell list for the summer, and I would say it's almost impossible to disagree with any of that. I hate that we have to sell Mainsley, but we do. I love that you call him Mainsley, which is a compliment.
Kolasinac will probably leave on a free. His contract will probably get terminated, if we're being honest, just with his wages.
I wish we didn't have to sell Chambers, but we're certainly not giving him any reason to stay, and we're killing his market value the longer that goes on. But yeah, I would sell these guys. Frankly, I would love to sell Xhaka, but that's not going to happen. But I think I would love to see him go, because I think he could actually bring in some money that we could use on like a Basuma type character. But this is not a transfer podcast, so we'll move on. Let's see what else we have here. Mkhitaryan was canceled and replaced with Willian. Yeah, that may not have been the best move. I think we've had some difficulty with our right winger position lately until Saka finally took it over. A little bit of tooling from back when I was getting the ump from Lee Judges. Flip-flop Lee Judges, like Casey puts it. I love me some Lee Judges. I can't tell you how much I love that guy. There were some write-offs that happened. Probably Santi Cazorla was probably one of the player impairments that happened on this financial statement that we've been talking about today. Let's see what we got here. Kroenke's most likely pissed being forced into the Partey deal. Well, whether he was pissed off or not about it, Don, he did it. And you gotta give him credit for that, because even though the impact has been impaired by his injuries, there's no question that's an impactful signing. We've got years ahead of us, hopefully, with him. So, and the last comment, Don, yo-yo, that is not – I do not believe Don is referring to Wenger as a yo-yo. I believe he's referring to the person in the chat, yo-yo. So let me put the question here. Yo-yo said, Don, there's a difference. Wenger had no one really to answer to footballing-wise. Arteta and Edu should be different. This is an excellent point. Arsene Wenger was given complete control of the ship while the ownership of that ship was being determined over the course of 6 or 7 years. The owners of the ship were not arguing about, but basically all juxtapositioning about who owned what and how. And in the meantime, the captain of the ship was trusted by everybody. Whether he drove the ship into an iceberg or not, or into a glacier, that could be debated. But he had no one to answer to, because he was getting the job done the way it needed to be done to keep the club afloat. And in the meantime, Kroenke, owning anywhere from 8.8% to 60% of the club, was still probably not going to dump tons of his own money or go too far to go beyond what was absolutely necessary, knowing that Usmanov owned the other 30%, or that something else can happen. It's once he became the full owner that we've actually seen more money being spent for that reason. And also people brought in that Arsene Wenger would have to answer to. So I think that's great. And Don Yuan said Wenger was managing the books for the Kroenkes. He lost his ambition and motivation to win. I disagree that he lost his ambition and motivation to win. I just think he was too stubborn to see that the game was changing around him, both tactically, financially, and otherwise. And he still wanted to win the way he wanted to win. He didn't lose his ambition and motivation to win. He lost his pathway to winning and his ability to change with the environment. So he should have demanded more, and he's walking around, I think, in his book and in his statements, acting like he could have been supported more. I don't believe it for a second. That's it. There are some other great pods that are on right now, and in about an hour and 10 minutes. There'll be another one. We're going to do a Burnley preview with the original, the OG crew. Andy, Owen, and myself will be doing a Burnley preview. So it'll just be a brief 70 minutes without having to look at this beautiful face. It'll be a little bit longer before we get to see this beautiful face again from Mikey Herz. But thank you for putting your face on our show, for coming on short notice. I love to have someone to kind of bounce things off of. And to everyone that was in the chat today, I appreciate you hanging in there, and would love to get some feedback, a thumbs up or other feedback on what you thought of it. It's one of the rare times you'll see me take something seriously. So I can't promise you'll get too much more of that over the next few weeks. So with that said, thanks for joining us. Tune in.
Thank you.
At 9 o'clock Pacific, or not Pacific, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern time, to the Gooners podcast Burnley preview. And come on, you Gooners.